Questions?
I'm a little unclear about New York City schools. The other day you said this is the city's decision, they have an agreement at 3%. Today you said, well, I might have to impose an orange zone and I might have to close the schools, which an orange zone does. So what's going on? Does the city still have the ability to close its schools? Are you now taking control and saying that you have the power to make this decision? And for the millions of parents who want to know, are the schools going to open tomorrow in New York City?
All right. First of all, let's try not to be obnoxious and offensive in your tone, because you're 100% wrong. These laws have all been in effect for months. I've always said, we set initial parameters, and then the school district picked a percent within those parameters. New York City picked 3%. We announced the orange zone law over a month ago. I don't know if you were here or if you were paying attention, but that has been in effect for over a month. It always said, if by the state's numbers you hit 3%, the schools close. What's going on here is nothing that the law hasn't said for over a month. We then had the test out procedures. If you were paying attention, you would have known we closed the schools in New York City 2 weeks ago. Remember when we did an orange zone and a red zone in Brooklyn and Queens, and we closed the schools? Don't you remember that?
It was 3 weeks ago.
Okay, so what are you talking about? What are you talking about? You're now going to override. We did it already. That's the law, an orange zone and a red zone. Follow the facts.
I'm still confused.
Well, then you're confused.
I'm confused, and
Then I'll tell you what, Jimmy.
Parents are still confused as well. The schools
No,
in New
they're
York
not
City
confused.
tomorrow.
You're confused.
No, I think
Read
parents
the
are
law.
very confused as well.
Read the law, and you won't be confused.
But Governor,
Go ahead.
following Jimmy's question, are the schools going to be open tomorrow?
The schools are open by state law.
But will they be open tomorrow? That's the question. I think Jimmy's correct in asking that question. I don't think it's obnoxious at all.
Well, I don't really care what you think. Of course, you agree with him because you're in the same business with him. The schools, by state law, well, what is the answer to your question? What is the answer to your question?
I don't know what the answer is.
Yes, you do.
You said
When
last
does the
week-
state close the schools?
When you get to an orange zone, which you're suggesting could happen, but is not necessarily happening by tomorrow.
So then what are you asking? You just answered your own question.
The other week
But on
you
one
said,
hand- on one
Excuse
hand-
me.
But on one hand, you have granted Bill de Blasio the kind of oversight of his schools, and there are rumors that the number in New York City will rise above 3%, which would trigger closing of schools. Now, you have just said that an orange zone could be in the offing for the entirety of New York City, which would also close schools, but your number is 2.5. So I guess just the point blank question is, are schools going to be open tomorrow in New York
Let's
City?
do it again for you, because maybe gets confusing over the days and nights. Schools set their own, 700 school districts, they all set their own number. That's the number. Unless they fall into a microcluster. The microcluster overrides the local rules. Yellow, orange, red. If it's Buffalo, I don't even know the Buffalo closing number for schools. But the Buffalo schools close in that orange zone, right? Why? Because it's an orange zone and it's over 3%. Well, maybe Buffalo had a rule of 4% or 5% or 6%. I don't know. Doesn't matter. If it goes over 3% in an orange zone, because now it's saying the decision isn't just about a school, It's about a school in an intensely infected community with a family that's infected and a candy store that has a high infection rate, on a bus route that has a high infection rate. So the microclusters override the normal locally set school infection rate.
Why didn't you close the schools in
Right?
Erie County
Excuse
last
me.
week? You were over 3%.
Excuse me, right?
I understand the state law overrides the city's decision-making on this. I do
And, no,
understand.
not city. Any local school district, so it just happened in Buffalo, any local school district in a microcluster zone, because that's now a highly infected zone. The schools can remain open in an orange zone, but they have to do additional testing.
Understood. On a larger point, when you're talking about microclusters, those are obviously supposed to be kind of limited geographic areas. New York City is obviously not a limited geographic area, nor is it a limited population center. How would that qualify as a microcluster? Why is that not just a regional shutdown?
Microcluster is not spatially defined. Microcluster was as opposed to statewide action or regional action.
But is that not a region, New York City, with 9 million
No,
people in it?
Long Island and Westchester would be within the region. So microcluster was, I guess your point about the connotation of micro.
Well, because you said that there are 10 regions in the state, and one of those regions is New York City. So if you're going to shut New York City down to an extent with lesser restrictions under an orange zone, that is by ipso facto a regional shutdown, is it
Well,
not?
yeah, but the micro is to distinguish from statewide or normally region-wide. So Erie is not, we're not doing all of Western New York. It's a micro zone. We're not doing Chautauqua, we're not doing Cattaraugus, et cetera. It's a micro zone. That's micro as opposed to regional.
But your threshold, Governor, your threshold is.
Nick?
Go ahead.
Whose numbers are going to prevail with this? There's a difference between the city and state's numbers. And public health experts are saying New York is one of the top 15 highest infection rates. Our positivity rates just show we're doing a lot of testing, and we're still seeing clusters in Rockland and Chemung. Why hasn't New York taken broader steps like closing down indoor dining or sort of more?
Okay, let's slow your
united-
question down. Experts said
The first
that
one
New
was
York
about-
is one of the 15 highest infection rates. That's what you said?
Yes, and those positivity ratings
Okay,
are just about
where,
much
how do you see that?
You previously cited different groups, including COVID Act Now and RT Live and COVID Exit Strategy.
Okay, but look at these numbers.
Those are just about how much testing those states are doing, and John Hopkins has said that those numbers aren't completely up to date and may differ from the state's levels because they're still trying to correct its formula.
What does that mean?
Those numbers don't match the positivity ratings in like states like South Dakota, for example. They do not have 56% of tests coming up positive. Those are
Where did you
out
get
of
the
date.
50?
Hopkins
These are Johns
website.
Hopkins
Yes,
numbers.
I spoke to Johns Hopkins and they said that they're working on updating that page.
So Johns Hopkins says Johns Hopkins numbers are wrong?
In some cases, yes, that they might be different than the states.
And
of-
Johns Hopkins says that New York, that is now 4th in the nation, is in the top 15?
So this is positivity ratings. I'm talking about, remember the R0, the infection rate that's calculated by different groups.
All right,
including
anyway, so what's the question?
Why, we're still seeing clusters in Rockland and Chemung, and it's really spreading throughout western and central New York. Why hasn't New York taken broader steps like closing indoor dining or more united policies in schools on mask wearing?
When do we close indoor dining?
Is there just a need to rethink our metrics when there is so much spread throughout the nation in New York?
We close at the lowest percentages in the nation. Our calibration is the lowest. Let's say we go to orange at 3%. 3% is the 5th It's Massachusetts. It's every state after Massachusetts is 3%.
And my first question, Governor, my first question was about what happens if there's a difference between the city and the state numbers? What if there's a difference? Whose numbers override? If New York City says our numbers show it's 3% and yours say 2.5, who's,
What's the answer to that question?
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know
No,
that the
it-
state law governs?
So state law would override the New York City's numbers if they say their numbers are
You don't
higher?
know that the state law governs?
I'm asking just what would happen in this case.
You don't know that the state law governs? We've had this conversation 1,000 times. State law governs. Except on schools, we left it to the local districts besides the orange zone, which is a state law. So local school districts pick the percentage, 2%, 5%, 7%, whatever they pick. Their law governs on that. So New York City's law is they close at 3. There's a differential in some of our numbers, which is due to the timing of the numbers, which is complex, but it's really irrelevant. So some cities will say, or counties will say, their numbers are different than state numbers. We say 2.9, they say 3.2, et cetera. On schools, their numbers govern because they had the ability to set their number. But on anything that has a state law, obviously the state governs. Nick?
On the county sheriffs, they say that they will, some county sheriffs say they will not be enforcing the 10-person limit on gatherings in homes. And also on the issue of pay raises for the legislature and some state officials, they will not be getting them this year. I know your pay raise is kind of separate and apart from that. What's the status of your pay raise going into effect for 2020?
I'm going to give my pay raise to you because I think you have done an extraordinary job as a journalist this year.
I don't think that's true, but go ahead.
Which part don't you think is true? Do you think part A or part B is not true? Part B, I think, is true. You are a great journalist. Part A is untrue. I'm not giving you my $25,000. I am going to, the way it works, I think it's a little complicated. The judges and the legislators don't get a legal raise. Technically, the the 4 statewide do, and the commissioners do. I'm going to ask them to defer their raises and not take a raise, given the overall financial picture, for the same rationale that we didn't do a raise. I understand there's a disconnect in the law, but I'm going to ask the commissioners, myself, the other electeds, not to take a raise this year. And then I'll do an EO to that effect. Because it's the same rationale as not giving a raise to the other people, Nick. Second, on the sheriffs, I don't believe as a law enforcement officer you have a right to pick and choose what laws you will enforce. An EO is a law that has been litigated, right? Well, I don't believe in that law, and therefore I won't enforce it. That is, frankly, frightening to me as an individual, frightening to democracy. It's arrogant, and it violates your constitutional duty. I didn't say, I swear to uphold the laws that I agree with. I didn't say that. If I don't agree with the law, then I'm not going to enforce that law. No, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. I'm a law enforcement officer. I enforce the laws. I don't get to pick and choose. Well, I'm not going to enforce domestic violence law because I think that's a family affair. They had a family fight, and I don't think it's the state's right to come in and say, you shouldn't treat your wife that way, you shouldn't treat your husband that way. No, there's a law, and you have to enforce the law. Or don't call yourself a law enforcement officer. Say, I enforce the laws that I think are good laws. That's what you get. But then I'm not a law enforcement official, and I'm not operating a law enforcement agency. And that has consequences too. But that's what I think. Last question, Big John.
Governor, on that point, how do you expect them to enforce the 10-person limit? I mean, short of knocking door to door, I mean, how can you enforce that?
That's a different question. Different question. Bona fide question. How do I enforce the mask ordinance? It's hard. A lot of people don't wear a mask. What do? Do I go up to everybody who's not wearing a mask? How do I do that? Good question. That is different than saying, I'm not enforcing a law because I don't agree with it. I don't recognize that law. I don't recognize it. I refuse to recognize that law. It violates my political belief, and therefore, I don't enforce it. Literally, I had a conversation with a law enforcement officer at one time who said, I think domestic violence is a family matter. I said, what? He said, well, it happens in a home. It's a family affair. I don't think it's the state's business to come in and say how a husband and wife should treat each other. Look, maybe that's a theory. I think it's repulsive. But it's not up to you. It's a law.
But is there a way, I mean, so it is a separate question, you know, it is different from saying, I'm not going to enforce it, but the question of how do you enforce it, what would you suggest?
That's not what they said, and that was not the question.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
That's what I'm asking. How would you suggest to them they enforce it? Or is it only something you can do after contact tracing after the fact?
Well, no, you could if you wind up in a circumstance. I mean, nobody's saying knock on doors, count heads, right? But you come across a gathering for one reason or another, and there's 20 people there. You say, this can't happen. By the way, how did we get there? And also, by the way, states all across the nation are doing this. This is like not a novel New York law. Do me a favor, see how you can look at how many states have the 10 or more? Jersey has it, Connecticut has it, California has it. You know where it's spreading now? That's why on my personal theory here, people change their behavior. It's less in bars and restaurants. It's still there. But they've migrated to home gatherings. That's why we call it living room spread, family spread. That's why I think Thanksgiving is going to be terrible. Because they said we can't hang out in the bar, we can't go to a restaurant. Let's go to your house. We'll watch the Bills game. We'll have a few beers. We'll hang around. And by the way, if I'm going, do you mind if I bring Jesse and Nick? No. Tell them to come. Tell them to bring a six-pack. Okay. Now we're sitting there with 25 people. All innocuous. Nobody malicious. That's where it's coming from. And this is really hard to stop. Because you're right. It's very hard to restrict. It's very hard to regulate, and it's very hard to police. So, yeah, is it hard to police? Yes. But if you see it, stop it. That's really the point of the law. If you see it, stop it. Don't invade privacy. Don't do any of that. But if you see it, stop it. Which is different, John, than saying, I just refuse to enforce that law because I don't agree with it. That, I believe, violates that person's constitutional oath. I don't believe that person is a law enforcement officer. I believe that person should not be certified as a law enforcement officer. I don't want a law enforcement officer who says, I'm only enforcing the laws that I like or that I think should be enforced. By the way, a lot of police officers don't wear a mask. Well, how are you supposed to then enforce other people wearing a mask when they see you not wearing a mask? I violate the law, but you can't. No. Nobody said you were above the law. Well, I'm a cop. I can have a couple of drinks and drive home, and if a buddy of mine stops me. No. The law is the law. And nobody is above it. It's the only way it works. And this living room spread is the new problem. And it will go up after Thanksgiving. And you will see orange zones and increased positivity after Thanksgiving. I'll wager you on it today, and you're going to see more dramatic action, and then it's going to get worse, because what comes next? Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and that's going to be the problem. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Schools,
School closures in New York City?
if the mayor said, okay, the mayor said 3%. If the schools hit 3% in the city, I expect the mayor, who has said 57 times, if they hit 3%, we will close them. That is in conformance.
The Chancellor has said that will happen. I'm asking for reaction to that schools will be closed in New York City.
Oh, I'm sorry, say that
The
again?
Chancellor has announced to principals that schools will be closing temporarily in New York City.
So the mayor's saying it hit 3%?
The Chancellor has said that in emails to principals that the schools will be closed temporarily, yes. So I just wanted a reaction from you, the state's.
But that is what the mayor has always said. And remember, it's not, the mayor said, when I say the mayor said, it's not technically accurate. We went through a very formal process where I said consult with the parents, make them part of it, have web chats, have webinars, because you can't just by fiat say the school's open or the school's closed. It only works if the parents are willing to send the children. So make it an inclusive collective process. I mandated that the school district consult with the parents and have webinars, et cetera, and answer all the questions. So that 3%, the mayor set, in my opinion, in a collaborative with the parents. And that was the agreement, and the agreement should be honored. So, and if it is 3%, then I understand exactly.
I understand the mechanics of it, but my question for you is like the closing of New York City schools, what does that say about the state's broader progress? You have touted the state's progress for months and months and months. This would appear to be a setback. How do you feel about that?
I mean, your microcluster strategy is not working at this point to curb the statewide spread. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, well,
Are we having broader restrictions at this point?
yeah.
I mean, the cluster strategy has largely failed.
Let's not talk your characterizations, okay? And your adverbs. Let's talk fact.
I love talking about it.
The whole world is going up, right? The whole world. Every state in the nation is going up, right? So success becomes what? How you're doing relative to everybody else. That's what success becomes. Success is not, are you defying reality?
Does that mean more statewide closure?
Excuse me. Are you defying reality? It's how are you doing compared to everybody else? We are 4th in the United States of America. Come to me with anything else that we're 4th in the United States of America after having had the highest infection rate in the United States of America. New Yorkers are doing a great job, and don't demean them, because the entire world is going up. It's disrespectful to New Yorkers. Of course they are, because they're going up on the world. If you're on the planet, the cases are going up. The question becomes, how are you doing relative to everyone else? And New Yorkers are doing better than everyone else. That is a fact, not your opinion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.